Go? Oh, hi there. Hey. Hang on a second. I've got my notes. You say something.
Hello, this is Richard Saunders from Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. We're waiting for Tim Mendham, who's running to the other side of the pub. He forgot his beer. Very important Skeptics in the Pub. He's coming back now. A big hand for Tim Mendham.
Okay, this is a bit of an interesting experiment here. Actually, we're live in two different parts of the world, the virtual world and the real world. Thank you for coming to Skeptics in the Pub. Real people, I believe. As long as none of you start fading away or suddenly sort of stopping, whatever. Okay, my name is Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer and Editor for Australian Skeptics Inc. So we're here to have this presentation, but before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land we are on. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Okay, now for your information, for those here, and apologies to those people who are online, the people here, we have some copies of the magazine to give away. Whoa. Skeptic Magazine and Skeptical Inquirer, okay, which is the US magazine. Over there in that corner and up that corner, please help yourself to as many as you like because I don't want to carry them back. Right, so there's a number there to look at. So they're all free. And then, of course, as soon as you've taken them, you must fill in the subscription form that's inside to make sure that you subscribe to the magazine. Now, as we said, this event is being live streamed right there, right, to people. So this is a trial run. So please bear with us if there's any problems. I doubt if there will be any because we have the wonderful Lara Benham over here who's looking after all the technology. And so that should be running very smoothly, but please bear with us. Now, for those people who are streaming, if you want to do questions, you've got to use the Slido. No, we're not Slidoing tonight. Yell loudly. Okay, we'll try. Okay, right, yeah, okay. So the people who are watching, you've just got to watch. Okay, so apologies for that. Reminder that if we're here face-to-face, we're also having a convention on in December 3 to 4 in Canberra, face-to-face. The first face-to-face convention we'll have had for 3 years, which is pretty exciting actually, to actually meet people and to say hello, speakers, other skeptics, etc. So it's a great opportunity to mingle as we have never done before, or at least not for the last few years. So please have a look at that, skepticon.org.au. That's skepticon.org.au to have a look at the lineup of great speakers and to get your tickets, etc. There will be social events, Friday night, social gathering. There'll be a post-convention social gathering after the convention on the Sunday night. And there will also be a dinner that's being organised right now for the Saturday night. So it'll be a big event, as I said, the first for several years that we've been able to do it. Okay, but our talk tonight. Zion Lights is a science communicator from the UK, and she'll be talking about the myths surrounding nuclear power and clean energy. She's known for her environmental advocacy work. She's founder of the evidence-based climate activism group Emergency Reactor and author of The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting. She's also a keen astronomer who has given TED Talk on stargazing, and she is the former editor of The Hourglass, Extinction Rebellion's print newspaper, and was also a spokesperson for the group. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Zion Lights.
But I have to hold this too, yeah? All right. G'day. Picking up the lingo while I'm here. Okay, so my name is Zion, and I have come all the way from the UK to take you on a journey of how I went from mind and embracing scientific evidence. Can I just? Yeah. Okay, great. So so this is me. Early on in my journey, I was really concerned about climate change when I was quite young, and I was trying to get my parents to recycle before there was any curbside recycling. I learned about global warming at school and I was very worried about it and didn't understand why people around me weren't worried about it. And so I did what most people who are that concerned about the environment would do, and I joined groups like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. I don't have a lot of pictures from back then, but I have a few. On the top left, this is a protest against the tar sands investment of this bank, RBS. And basically what we did was we went up to their offices in Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Fringe when there were lots of people there. And we went into all their banks in small groups, affinity groups, we call them, dressed as tar sand monsters, which is why we're wearing bin bags. And we shut down all the banks. So I've done a lot of this kind of activism, a long time ago, I've done a lot of this kind of activism, just desperately wanting to help the situation. We had Indigenous people flown over from Alberta in Canada who were being told they would have to leave the land to have this pipeline go through it. It's just a cause that's really important to me. And they did actually divest from tar sands, but I don't think it was to do with our protest. But I spent a long time doing activism like this, anti-McDonald's protest down there, and a lot of anti-nuclear protests, and a lot of writing about nuclear in a very negative way. So basically, when you join these environmental groups, unfortunately, there is a lot of pseudoscience. I don't really know why. I've never really worked it out, but there is a lot. And I'm not saying that other groups don't have it, but I was kind of surrounded by it for a long time. And when you join those groups and you hear the same misinformation again and again, you just believe it. It's not really anyone's fault. No one's deliberately misleading you. They also have been misled, and it just perpetuates. So it's quite hard to break the mold. My slide's in the wrong order. Okay, but these are my children. Okay, so I was really concerned about the environment, and I did lots of things that you do as a good environmentalist. I gave up meat. I became vegan in 2002. It wasn't really a thing there. I feel like it's not as big a thing here, but in Britain it's quite a big thing. And you can get vegan food everywhere now, but it was quite hard back then. I kind of embraced this idea that it's all about how I live and what I do. I never had a car, and I quit flying for about 15 years. I didn't fly anywhere. And I wrote this book. And this book was, the reason I wrote this book was because my daughter was born, Arwen here, and I wanted to learn how to live as a family with a low carbon footprint, but all the books that I read that were kind of eco-friendly and about families were full of pseudoscience. And when I say full, I'm not exaggerating. They were the main books on the market, and they had homeopathy in there, not saying use it as well, use it instead of doctors. And they had quite a lot of anti-vaccine sentiment that was fairly standard. And I was not an anti-vaxxer. So I was really disturbed by this. I thought, well, lots of people like me want information on how to raise a family with a low carbon footprint, and it doesn't exist. So I'm going to write the book, and the publisher was really keen. And I asked them, can I put a chapter in there about vaccines? And they said, well, is it an environmental issue? And I said, I don't think that social justice issues should be seen separately to environmental issues. To me, it's kind of the same cause. So they said, yeah, sure. And I naively put in a chapter about vaccines. And look, every chapter it's not my opinion. It's me looking through the data and then telling you this is what it says, and make up your own mind. It's not me writing stream of consciousness. I could have done that, but I didn't want to. And anyway, it didn't matter because I was so heavily attacked for writing about vaccines. I even had people saying, emailing me to say, hey, I really liked every chapter except the vaccines one. And I would say, well, I would engage with them. I say, the same scientific method that informs the other chapters that you like informs that chapter too. And they say, no, they've been controlled by big pharma. No, but that interested me because I thought, have I done something wrong? Maybe I'm not communicating this in the right way. So I went back to university and I did a master's in science communication, which is very eye-opening. And it basically told me that I had done it the wrong way, because the first thing they tell you is you're not going to convince people with facts alone. It's all about the storytelling. And I just written an entire book with lots of facts, not thinking about, the personal stuff and the storytelling. So I was okay, maybe I've done something wrong here. Maybe I'll try something different. And around this time, I was doing a lot of freelance writing and more public speaking about lots of different issues, usually climate communication, because back then it wasn't, there was a lot of climate denial around. I feel like that's dissipated a lot now, but there was more work to be done. And I got asked to be a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion. So I wasn't there at the beginning. I wasn't there at the inception of the group. I'd kind of stepped away a little bit because I was finding the pseudoscience a bit much, and people could be quite mean about it. You know, I had a couple of writing gigs that got cancelled where the editor said, "You're pro-vaccine, you won't be allowed to write for us anymore." And I was a bit sad about it. And I'd been kind of flying solo for a bit. So Extinction Rebellion said, "We've seen you talk, come and speak for us." And I kind of thought, is it going to be the same as all the other groups? You know, am I not going to be able to say certain things? And they said, no, we want you to come and talk about climate change. We'll give you big slots. And they did. So they gave me this slot. I did many different slots and over the period of about 2 years. But they gave me this slot on the Andrew Neil show. I don't know if you've heard of that over here. He's very, very popular forensic interviewer in Britain. This show doesn't run anymore. He recently started a different channel, went over to a different channel with his own shows. But yeah, so I was asked to do this interview, and I was very confident walking into this interview. So we had been in Trafalgar Square that same day. We had shut down Trafalgar Square, and I'd been there trying to help. You know, people were being like pulled out of their tents, and the tents were being thrown in the back of lorries, and I was there trying to help negotiate with the police to like treat the protesters better. And then I kind of looked at the times. I've got to get across London to the studio. I was very well briefed. I was generally quite confident about the data anyway around climate change. But that was not what this interview was about. And then I sat down in this chair, and Andrew Neil said, "One of your other spokespeople said on TV the other day that 6 billion people are going to die by the end of the century. Do you stand by this claim?" And I just completely froze. And there were millions of people watching. But what you didn't know, so what everybody saw was, idiot, climate protester, doesn't know anything, typical activist. But what they didn't know was that when that claim had been made, we'd had a huge fight in Extinction Rebellion with half of the people saying, we should stand by, it doesn't matter if it's not true, we need to wake people up. And half of us saying, no, we need to be accurate with the evidence because all we do is hurt the cause. And I was actually leading that group with the scientists. So I was really heavily batting for that team, and my team was losing. So we hadn't come to an official decision, but they were kind of saying, we're probably going to stick by the statement. So then I sat there. That was the first question. They'd done their research really well on me, knowing I couldn't defend it. And I sat there knowing that I couldn't criticize it because I was there as a spokesperson and the group didn't want it criticized. So the press described it as a rabbit in the headlights moment, and it was. It's been played so many times now. It's really just awful to watch. I know you're going to go home and Google it. Enjoy. But it was a turning point for me because first of all, I thought, wow, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore because actually he's right. And then he said, what are we going to do to replace gas? I'm not disagreeing that we shouldn't wean off gas. What are we going to do to replace it? And this time I sat there thinking, oh no, I should say nuclear. Don't say nuclear. They'll be really angry at Extinction Rebellion, but it is nuclear. And I was just and I just said, you know what, Andrew, I'm not here to offer you solutions. And that clip was put online the next day and it had 2 million views. In 24 hours, I had to turn off all my social media. People were very angry with me for many different reasons from the group I was in and the outside world. And, and here I was very happy being their spokesperson, trying to do a good job. I was always thinking, if I don't do it, someone else will do it, and maybe they won't be as accurate with data. And obviously in this time, I kind of missed this bit out. In this time, when I went back to do my master's at university to learn about communicating science, this is when I changed my mind about nuclear because I came across so much evidence and realized, I've kind of been misled on this, the way that other people are about vaccines, but I never, ever said it publicly because I don't want to lose all of my friends and the people I worked with and my writing opportunities. And yeah, this kind of misinformation is very common across society. I find that the storytelling around misinformation is really powerful. Even I hear stories and I can feel I'm having a reaction, and I go, what's the actual evidence here before we react? Let's have a look at what's actually happening. So like, here's an example, the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine that, it's been invaded, it's been taken over, it's terrible, the workers haven't been treated well. But I keep hearing these claims of, it's going to blow up, it's going to be worse than Chernobyl. Well, it physically can't blow up because Chernobyl had a type of reactor that had a design flaw that enabled it to blow up. It was an RMBAK reactor, and they don't make those anymore. And the few that are still in existence, they've since then, they added safety features so they can't just blow up. So they might melt down, but they won't be a big explosion. So I keep seeing that repeated now, and I keep saying to people, you don't have to worry about fantasies of what might happen. I would be more worried that the Russians send the Ukrainian workers home and they get them to shut down the reactors, and then lots of Ukrainians will die because they won't have any access to electricity. They get quite a lot from their nuclear power plants, and they're it's winter there, so they'd have another thing to contend with. So again, it's kind of like a leap. You have to kind of leap out of that emotional space into the logical space. And I know that's hard because I had to do it about nuclear. But yeah, I understand why people fall for these myths, because I fell for them too. But this was the kind of data that changed my mind. You probably know this site, Our World in Data, really good breakdowns of all different topics, agriculture, energy. It's a really good resource. And when I saw this, it frankly blew my mind. And I remember my friend sent it to me. He was an engineer. And I said, the numbers must be wrong. This is one of the things that really changed my mind. And he said, they're not. Go away and look into it some more. And I did. But I knew that fossil fuels weren't great. I knew that we had to wean off of fossil fuels. But I didn't know that nuclear energy was that safe and that clean. And there's another thing that I was afraid of: radiation. Quite a lot of people are afraid of radiation. So we did some fun public engagement around this, where we went into big cities in Britain, like London and Bristol. And we had a stall, information stall, lots of leaflets, and lots of scientists came out and engineers to engage with the public. There's about 40 of us at one point. And we'd hand out bananas. Like some days we'd hand out 500 bananas. There'd be so many bananas. Each banana was a conversation starter, because you'd hand it out and you said, it's radioactive? And people's reactions are really funny, because they'd like drop, what have you done to it? They'd like drop it and then kind of go, oh, they'd realize that obviously that wasn't the case. And so, what am I missing? And every person we spoke to, there were maybe like 2 people in the course of an entire day who kind of were like, no, I'm still scared of it. Every other person was just kind of saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know bananas were naturally radioactive, and in fact above average radioactive. I didn't know that people are radioactive and that food is radioactive, that exists naturally in nature. And I didn't know that the bulk of the radiation that we produce comes from it's natural radiation, or it's from medicine. Well, medicine is the human-made radiation, but they're the same really. So again, I changed my mind because I saw the data. So I started trying to find ways to communicate it. And actually, again, just showing people a chart isn't really enough. Handing someone a banana and having a conversation about it is a much better way to do it. And I feel like as well, then every time they see a banana, they have that kind of awareness. Maybe it's a little bit naughty, but this is what activists do. And activist messaging is very powerful. So I believed all kinds of lies about waste, because you must have heard this when you think about nuclear. Maybe you think it yourself, what about the waste? I always say to people, fossil fuel waste is being stored in the Earth's atmosphere right now. Why don't people ever talk about the waste there? Why do we worry so much about waste that is so well managed? It's almost ridiculously well managed. It's just put in these big canisters, concrete casks. And this is all of Switzerland's spent fuel, or nuclear waste. Spent fuel is a technical term. And I've been to visit waste. I've had a little hug of the waste. I've used my little dorky Geiger counter to measure the radiation. It's not very high, but I thought it would be exciting. And it was part of my process of overcoming the fear of waste. But it's an interesting thing that messaging is so caught on with people, that people are really afraid of it, when it's the last thing they should be afraid of. I think a lot of it comes from pop culture. Again, I don't think anybody did it deliberately. I think, things like The Simpsons. So when I was heavily anti-nuclear, I thought that waste was this green, goopy, acidic liquid, because that's what it is in The Simpsons. And a lot of people have that image in their minds, even if they don't realize where it's from, because then it's used in other things too. And if you think about The Simpsons, so specifically, the biggest, baddest, evil person is a nuclear industry leader, right? And the worker, Homer Simpson, is just the last person you want near anything like that, right? I accept that, but come on, if you've ever met these engineers, they're completely opposite. they're absolute just sticklers for detail, like annoyingly so. They are not just dropping things and turning up late and doing them wrong at all. It's not my experience. So yeah, so these myths have crept in a little bit more on waste. This, I really like this because I think it's such good public engagement. This is a nuclear waste facility where they manage and store the waste in the Netherlands. The outside of the building is painted like this. And inside it's an art gallery and a museum with a cafe. I know, the Dutch, they know what they're doing. And these are spent fuel canisters. So the waste is in there and you just sit and have a coffee. I really want to visit actually, but they closed over the pandemic. And since I contacted them, they haven't had staff in. But I'd like to go and visit there because I think it's an incredible way to manage waste. It's all just in one building. Again, it's perfectly safe. You can walk right up to it. Doesn't harm anyone. And this is another way that I sometimes communicate about waste, which is, again, you know, what we're comparing it to is fossil fuels, which have so many problems. I'm sure you're all aware of this already, but a lot of people don't think about it this way. But actually, air pollution from fossil fuels kills over 8 million people a year, and that's a conservative estimate. That's so many people. So before you're even thinking about climate change, that's already those are preventable deaths. And they're always in the most marginalized communities because they're people that have to live near coal-fired power stations and they don't really have a choice. And they have respiratory issues and their children have respiratory issues. I spoke to someone who is in one of these areas in Poland where Britain sometimes imports coal from. And this father said, you know, he can't open the window because the windows are covered in soot. His son did have respiratory issues. It's really sad, but they can't afford to move out. And I think we need to remember that whenever we say, well, we don't want waste stored in our backyard, but the alternative is importing fossil fuels from somewhere else where that cost is just outsourced to other people. And, you know, I think we should think about that. But this is what really changed my mind in terms of, well, why do we need nuclear? That might be the next question. So I accepted that, you know, yeah, okay, it's not bad like I thought it was, and plenty of places use it quite well, even if there have been a couple of meltdowns. Still much better than fossil fuels, but can't we do everything with renewables? You know, I used to promote renewables a lot. I still talk about renewables a lot, but I used to promote it as this kind of, that's the whole solution. And the fact is the evidence doesn't bear it out. So if you look at the IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, this is a United Nations report produced in 2018. It's called 1.5 Warming. There is a chapter in there on mitigation by Working Group 3. So you can look it up. It's quite comprehensive. Data is a bit boring, but you know, this crowd might like it. Not that you're boring, but I like it, but I recognize that, you know, I'm a little bit more geeky than the average person. And yeah, they crunch the numbers. It's not opinion, it's numbers. So all of these climate scientists got together and they crunched numbers. Now, how will we decarbonize? And there are 4 pathways of kind of different numbers, different ways to do it. And all of them include nuclear and renewables. So that to me is enough, because that report has 99% consensus. And if you know anything about scientists, it's really hard to, I don't know how they reach 99% consensus, because scientists bicker about the smallest things sometimes. But you know, the 99% consensus where we know that climate change is human driven comes from that same report. And yet a lot of us in the climate space who talk about that report or talk about that consensus ignore the same consensus in the chapter on mitigation, which says we need nuclear renewables to decarbonize. So a lot of those same groups are then protesting even now. One of the main solutions, I mean, if you're lucky geographically and you have a lot of hydro, you can do it with hydro, but you know, many countries don't have that option. Therefore, what's left? France is a really good example because, you know, this is our neighbor. We're often kind of looking at what France is doing in Britain. And we're jealous of France now because they built lots of reactors in the 80s. It took them about 10 to 12 years to decarbonize. Then they had over 70% clean energy mix from nuclear. Then they filled up the rest with renewables. They still have that mix today. And they also don't have the problem that we're having, which is that we're quite dependent on fossil fuels. And because of the issues with Russia now, there's an energy crisis across Europe. I don't know how much awareness you have of this, because I've spoken about it at other groups and people haven't really known. There's a severe energy crisis. We're struggling to know how we're going to get through the winter. You know, people are not going to make it through the winter because we just don't have enough supply. It's worse in places like Germany, where they were more heavily dependent on fossil fuels. But Britain isn't doing so great either. This is the This is the case study of what France did. So it's, you know, it's not, this is just, everywhere could do this. Everywhere could do this in 10 to 12 years. They could, and people say, well, you know, we don't have any industry, so Australia doesn't have it, but nor did France. They got the workers together, they made the technology, and it still works today. Some of them are coming offline now because it's been 40, 50 years, but they will build more to replace them, or they can extend their lifetimes. Yes, so what's happening in Germany is also really interesting, because Germany had really good intentions with this plan, Energiewende, which was to go all 100% renewables. And you know, no one's ever managed to do it. No large industrial nation has ever managed to do it. Some small places have. And so what they did was, the Fukushima Daiichi power plant melted down in 2011, and German politicians said, we're afraid now, we're going to shut down our nuclear power stations. So they had 11 power stations. And you know, this was an overreaction, of course, because first of all, nobody died at Fukushima, not from the power plant meltdown. People did die because of the tsunami and the earthquake. These are two separate events. More people died because they panicked when the meltdown happened and they tried to escape the area and they got into accidents. So fear of radiation and nuclear energy actually was more dangerous to people than the actual meltdown. The plant melted down. There was waste stored on site in canisters like the ones I showed you. Didn't harm anyone, weren't even cracked. They're very, very steady. I mean, they test them by flying planes into them. It's not very environmentally friendly, but anyway, there you go. And yeah, so Germany had a meltdown about Fukushima, and they reacted by shutting down their nuclear plants. And you know, Germany is not going to be hit by a tsunami, but anyway, this is what they chose to do. And I think it's good that they were phasing out coal too. So they also said, we're going to close all our coal-fired power stations. I think that's good. But the problem was they closed all of their base load because they closed their nuclear and coal. So when I say base load, I mean, we call it firm power, but it's basically the reliable stuff that's just always 24/7, and it just keeps chugging along. It's the same amount all the time. You know how many gigawatts you're getting out of it every day. You know what the generation is, all good. You just keep it running at that. Renewables can vary. If it's not windy, it's not windy. If it's not sunny, it's not sunny. Yeah, you guys get a lot of sun. I've heard people say that, but not at night. Yes, battery storage does work to an extent, but if you have several days of not very much wind or sun, the battery storage isn't that good. And I keep hearing people say that's around the corner, and that's fair enough. But I used to say that about 15 years ago when I was promoting renewables. And I think we don't really have more corners to kind of wait to turn. We need to use what we know works because we need to decarbonize now. So what Germany ended up doing was they had admirable intentions and they phased out their base load, but then because the wind would kind of go up and down and the sun would go up and down, they ended up getting into a deal with Putin, with Russia, with this pipeline, which again, I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is very recent. It's happened last week, where this pipeline has now been damaged. So on Ukrainian soil, there's a war being fought with weapons, but across Europe, there's a war being fought with energy, and people will die because of this war. And there's a lot of kind of conversation now about how Russia has been undermining energy security for some time before this happened. So it's really sad that I mean, Germany is going to take the hardest fall from this. So in Britain, it's quite bad because we rely on so much. So our fossil fuel mix is about 60%. So we rely on a lot, but some of it's from Norway, some of it's from Russia. Now that's been cut off. While Germany was like, you know, far more than that. And they also are getting coal. They were getting all the fossil fuels, coal and gas from Russia, and now that's been shut off. So they right now are rationing. They are rationing how much energy they can use. So the German government has said you can shower for this long, and you know, to their credit, they're doing it really well. But they would just release the figures and said still not enough to get it low enough. And they have these planned blackouts so that they can shut down businesses and, you know, keep hospitals running, and people will just have to live with it. And I think it's so sad that such a, you know, such a prosperous nation in other ways has fallen in this manner, and it's really just due to fear, like fear and ideology that was not based on evidence at all, because they're more afraid. They were so afraid of nuclear, they phased it out and got in bed with Putin, which, yeah, okay, that was before the invasion, but still probably not a good idea. Especially when they actually had to lay off workers at these nuclear power plants, which is I just think it's really sad. So they still have 3 operating, and they've just said this week that now they're going to pause decommissioning them. So the ones that have gone offline, they're offline now. They've spent a lot of time decommissioning them. The fuels all come out. The workers aren't there anymore. But the 3 that they've got, they've now said they'll extend to the end of the year, but it's still only to the end of the year. So they're not thinking about next winter. They're not thinking about energy needs for Germans generally. And actually, it's interesting because last year I saw a poll of German support for nuclear energy, and it was only about 5 or 6%. And I saw one the other day, and it was over 50%. It's funny when you actually suddenly realize the cost of energy. First of all, the cost to yourself. So in Britain, energy prices are quadrupling. That's not an exaggeration. People are having to close businesses, take out loans to pay energy bills. Everybody's worrying about the winter. There's kind of a bleak joke going around, which is like, oh, well, hopefully we'll have a warm winter. It's not great. But in Germany, it's even worse. Like it's so expensive, and there's so much shortage. And yeah, again, they made decisions based on ideology, and it's harmed them. So I have a different perspective on energy anyway, because my background is different to a lot of people in the environmental movement, which tend to be very well off, very privileged, middle class people, which is fine. They have the time and energy to spend on these issues, and I've spent a lot of time around them. But I've often had quite different views. So, for example, I was never anti-vax, but there were a lot of anti-vaxxers in some of the groups that I was in. And, that's because my parents, this is my mum here, they came from somewhere where they don't have access to vaccination. So you really hear the stories firsthand of like literally kids dying from what are actually preventable diseases, but there's no access. This is me. So my parents, I know, I'm so cute. So and there as well. So these are the only photos I have of this trip, but this is where my mum is from. And so I was in these groups, and then I didn't remember this trip very much, but in my 20s, my parents said, you should come to India, you should come to the Punjab. This is where we're from. You don't know what life was like. You keep talking about how people should live with less energy. You've written a book about it. And, they had a lot of respect for that, but they said, you should come and see what it's like to actually live with that little energy. This was the biggest wake-up call for me. Like, oh my goodness. Just no lighting, and it's dark. Snakes everywhere. It's not an exaggeration. They tell you these awful stories about as well, that so-and-so got bitten by a snake, and we watched him swell up, and then he died. And I'm like, okay, can I go home? No, because it's like 4 hours drive from the airport, middle of nowhere, completely rural. I mean, this is a lot of India. This is a lot of the world, actually. And I'm sorry that I had to see it to really realize, I think we don't really have that concept of poverty. We talk about poverty, we don't really have a concept. And poverty is energy poverty. Is what I really realized is, they're cooking over a little bit of wood. If they can afford a bit of coal, then they're lucky because it lasts longer. But you can see the lady, and this is the data bears this out. They have respiratory issues because they're always inhaling this smoke, but they know, but it's still better because they can cook for their families. And you just think, wow, they really need to have some development and be connected to grids and have access to electricity like we had. And then I went to COP26 last year, and there's all this talk about China and India burning too much coal. And I said, you know what? I've spent my lifetime protesting fossil fuels, but we don't get to say that to them. No, they need to develop and be lifted out of poverty the same way we did, so that we have a high quality of life. I would love it if it was with clean energy sources, but realistically, that's probably not going to happen, not for a while, although both China and India are building a lot of nuclear reactors because they haven't had that kind of anti-movement that swept a lot of the rest of the world, the developed world. And and they also have the workers, so they probably can do it quite quickly, much quicker than, some in Britain where we have a shortage of workers, which makes it difficult to build anything quickly. But yeah, this was very eye-opening to me. And it actually, something like the snake story really stayed with me because it's horrific. And I mean, I went, they're just barefoot, right? But they're just they have to live with it. So I had sandals, and I ended up tying bags around my feet because I never wanted my feet to be exposed, and I didn't want to get bitten by a snake. But the most crazy thing was that anti-venom exists. Like this, if you got bitten here, you would just be treated for it. So, but if you get bitten there, it's 4 hours to the hospital. You will be dead by the time you get there. So it's lack of access that people don't understand. So my parents have given them money to help. You know, they're just rice farmers. All my family, they're just rice farmers. My parents have given them money, but that won't solve any of the issues really. And I've got a cousin there who's around my age, who's completely confined to a chair. He's kind of stiff. I don't know exactly what happened, but he had epileptic fits when he was a child, and they couldn't get treatment. Again, my parents sent money over to get him treatment, and there was no access. And maybe this seems obvious to you. This is something that a lot of people don't realize, I think. It was access that was the issue. So he needed regular medication. You know, there's no Amazon Prime over here. He couldn't get access to what if my child had fits, I would get access to. And therefore, he has an extremely low quality of life and has to be carried around from chair to chair. And it's really sad because I think, well, that could have been me born then, and I could live like that. And then we have all the environmental groups that I've been very involved with for a long time saying, in fact, the leader of the Green Party said this to me, and she really liked my book, and she's on the front cover of one of the versions because she thought it was a really good idea. And she said to me, they're not happy there, though. You know, we went wrong. And this is a key message of the environmental movement. We went wrong somewhere. We got it wrong. That's why we should live with less and we should go back to it. She said they're in communities. They are in communities, but they would like their children to live out their childhoods. And for most of human history, children didn't, right? This is a reality. We lifted ourselves out of poverty, and they want to too. And they don't want the bare minimum. They don't want a few solar panels. That could work in the interim, but they essentially want the growth that we've had. And I argued with her, and I said, I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's fair to say because they're in communities they're happy. I don't think that's true at all. I think that's a massive misconception, and we shouldn't speak for them in that manner. But also, I think it's an interesting thing because if you think about quite a lot of those arguments that we hear around climate change and climate action, degrowth, live with less, all of that comes from this movement, and none of it is informed by evidence, and it's very rarely questioned, and it's quite hard to question because then you get called like, you know, I've been called a denier, or, you know, why do you want to have weight? I don't want to be wasteful. I'm not saying, you know, leave your lights on or drive unnecessarily. I don't even drive, you know, but I recognize that energy is life. And I think now Europe's learning that the hard way because so many of us are struggling. And the countries that are doing well, like France, are even saying, why should we? So there's an energy treaty in Europe where if you're struggling, other countries are supposed to provide what you don't have in terms of energy needs. And now, you know, some countries are saying, why should we provide that? Why should we provide it to Germany when they shut their own nuclear power plants? So Germany has actually been importing nuclear from Ukraine and France, but they shut their own power plants. I think that's really sad that friction is there now and that's happening. But that is the damage of believing this misinformation. Like it has real life consequences, just like when people don't vaccinate and you get outbreaks of measles in specific areas, pockets. It happens in Britain all the time, small pockets, families. But they're okay because then they'll still go to the hospital and get treated and they'll still survive. But, you know, it wouldn't work somewhere where they're not energy rich and very privileged. And, you know, are they happier? They get to live in communities. I mean, my parents, 1960s, my granddad fought for the British in World War II. He was held as a prisoner of war in Japan in a Japanese camp. And as a reward, all of his children were told, you can come to Britain. There's lots of factory jobs. There's a big industrial boom in the Midlands, which is where I was born. You can come to Britain. My parents didn't know where Britain was on a map. They didn't have a passport or a birth certificate. They didn't know their birth dates. They don't write them down over there. It relies on someone remembering. They couldn't speak English. Did they want to stay in this community? Like, yeah, they miss their family. They love their family, but they wanted their kids to survive and not live like this. And they got on a boat and just hope for the best. And actually all of their kids have survived and we've all thrived and we've all got good jobs. And, you know, I think we have to recognize two things that are true here that people don't want to do. One, fossil fuels. Yeah. Okay. Not so great. Cause climate change. We need to fix that now. But two, fossil fuels also lifted us out of poverty and gave us so much that we should be grateful for, that we are lucky to have. Now, all we need to do is transition to clean energy, not cut down, hope to cut down so much energy, but transition as well. So this is being seen now quite a lot. So this, I don't know if you know George Lambio. He's a prolific environmentalist writer in the UK, very well respected. So he's been writing, and this is an old article, but he writes about it now as well. But he wrote this 10 years ago. I spoke to him about this because he kind of went quiet after it, and he was just so attacked for writing this article that he went quiet for a while. But he's back on the advocacy now, probably because more of us are doing it. And the other article's a good one because Professor James Hansen was one of the first climate scientists to draw our attention to climate change. He testified in Congress in the US. He's written a lot of papers, and he also has written a paper on how nuclear energy saves lives. It's a really good paper. It calculates the number of lives saved when you replace any kind of fossil fuels with nuclear energy. And he said it was over 1,000 lives a month, and that's just from air pollution, not even looking at climate change. So I've been trying to flip the message. I was kind of like, okay, so I've learned that it's about the storytelling and the emotive stuff. But how do we do that with data and information? So I found some sort of fun ways of doing it. This is kind of like repurposing memes. So I don't know if you've seen this meme. This meme did the rounds in Britain just again and again. Like basically, this is the meme, and this is the outline, and then you put your own comment in there, and it's something controversial. So I've seen every version, but I made this and I printed it out, and then I posed in the form that the meme was just slightly sideways. These are the bananas that we're handing out to people, and this is really interesting because in the UK, people really disrespect anti-vaxxers, like they look down on them, and so lots of people were coming over, kind of going, I don't want to be like them. Am I wrong? And I said, well, what do you think about nuclear? And they said, it's bad. I said, why? And they didn't actually know why, which was interesting. So we had really good conversations, hundreds of conversations, people who had these conceptions, but they didn't know why. A couple of people would say, well, more than a couple of people, they would say, isn't the industry bad? I said, what did they do? And I honestly think it comes from The Simpsons, because no one could ever name, I'm not saying they've never done anything bad, but no one could ever name anything. And I said, well, I could tell you what the fossil fuel industry did. You know, we know that the fossil fuel industry poured billions into climate denial, funding climate denial. We know that they did their own studies that found out what their own products were doing years before the actual consensus on that data came out, and they buried that information. And we know that they continue to lobby for fossil fuels, right? So I could tell you what they did. I couldn't tell you what the nuclear industry did. And anyway, so it was interesting kind of challenging people in this way, and then just going over their misconceptions a little bit. And every person that walked away would say, actually, yeah, you have changed my mind. There are only a couple of people who didn't. And this is really interesting because there's data on this about anti-vaccination again, because I used to do a lot of more vaccine comms. And the data found that there are 4 separate groups of anti-vaxxers, and there are different ways of talking to them to engage with them, and there's sort of different levels of being against. And you know, on this end, the groups are quite easy to persuade, and on this end, this one group at this end, probably will never change their mind. For them, it's like a religion. What you need to do is learn to identify them and just not waste your time, basically. And they're often like sort of the gatekeepers. They're very loud and noisy in this group, so they persuade the others, but the others are not sure and they actually just want the information. But then, you know, something happens. Maybe they go to the doctor and the doctor's not very receptive to them. Maybe the doctor laughs at them for saying they're afraid of mercury or whatever, you know, whatever theory they have. And once that doctor-patient trust is gone, it's very hard. It's very hard to get back, but also they will just go to a homeopath who will listen to them. This is an emotive thing, right? They'll listen to them, they'll address their concerns, and they'll just do that instead. So in this study, they were looking at, well, how do we reach these different groups? Not the small percentage of completely anti people, the other 3 groups where they're somewhere on the fence, and they tried leaflets and they tried cold calling. None of that worked. And then what they did was they got doctors who were very well trained in communication, and they just went to the surgeries, got the contact details for the people who weren't vaccinating their children. They just sent open letters saying, there's absolutely no commitment, but if you want to come and ask questions. This person will be in the surgery all day. They had quite a high uptake because actually a lot of these people just like the people coming to have a banana, kind of asking questions. They just wanted information. And so lots of these, mostly mothers, some fathers, but it is mostly women, came and spoke to the doctors and asked their questions, and were listened to and heard. And after that, the vaccine uptake went up by about 80% just through talking to them. That doctor-patient trust is so important. They're such important communicators, which is why they can give you sugar pills, you know, and the placebo effect will work because you really trust and believe that person. The problem, I think, is no one's ever done it for nuclear. So I started doing it, and now I've become, it wasn't my intention to become like one of the loudest voices on it in the world, but I sort of have by accident. And I'm glad to see more people are doing it now. The other one is an action that I did. I call it an action. All I did was get this secondhand wedding dress and build more nuclear on it. But it's such a strong statement. And this is a dress that AOC wore. I don't know if any of you saw it. She had a dress just like this. I modeled it on her dress, but she had printed on the back in red, tax the rich, and she wore it to the Met Gala. And it became a meme. It was all over everywhere. People were changing the words. So I thought, why don't I do a real life one? It's not painted very well, but you know. Anyway, I wore it at COP26 and I just walked around in it. So I was there as a delegate and I did my talk, and then I just walked around in it, and you could see people's jaws dropping, and journalists coming over saying, do you mean it ironically? And I said, well, no, actually, no, the scientific consensus. And then, no, we agree. We just can't believe it. And I was like in the World Economic Forum and yeah, lots of journalists. All I did was walk around. All those times I was arrested for like blocking roads, gluing to stuff. Now I can just wear a dress and that's enough. So this is what it comes down to. I know that you all have an awareness of this, but I like to show this slide because I feel like it has an impact, and people kind of think about, oh, which side am I on and which side do I want to be on? And it's just so important. I admit that I was on this side. I admit that I was this guy. You know, I was that guy, and I fully admit that. Even though I would laugh at these people. So, you know, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to be challenged and reconsider. And, you know, final point, this is a point I make because we never have this conversation about energy, and it ties into what I said earlier about my parents escaping poverty. And, you know, actually I say poverty, they were not even as poor as some people I saw in India. They, at least their families had kind of roofs over their heads. And that's because my parents had sent money over. You know, money here is worth a lot over there. And they were able to build some structures. You know, it wasn't a lot, but it was more than other people have. You know, what is energy? Sometimes people say to me, we don't want technology to solve climate change, but we should build lots of renewables. And then I said, well, isn't renewables technology? You know, it's not, you don't just magically harness the sun. It takes a lot of mining and materials, and, you know, we should build everything, I think, but to address emissions. But it made me think about, well, what's technology? Why do people have this really negative view of technology? Like, technology is so bad. Fire is a really important technology. We don't think of it as technology, but once upon a time it was, because we didn't have fire, and we were the prey. We were the prey instead of the predators. And what happened was some humans, our distant ancestors, went, I can see that there's occasionally a bushfire. Maybe we can use that. Like, maybe, because this was before they were able to create it themselves. Maybe we can harness that somehow. And they did. And over a period of time, they learned to use it to cook. And because they could cook the meat, it meant that it was calorie rich. It was very calorie dense. And they never had this before. So their brains grew bigger because they could do this. And also they could preserve meat. So they were more likely to last in periods where there might not be enough food otherwise. And they created the hearth. You know, this is a nice place to gather around when it's cold. It wards off predators. It wards off flies. And linguists think that actually this is where language was created. It was because they would sit around the hearth and they started to, you know, develop sounds to communicate with each other. And you know, our brains grew so big that now it can be difficult for women to give birth. This is actually what happened because we discovered this incredible thing that was fire. Now just imagine for a second a whole load of protesters in the corner over here. No to fire. What about the waste? But the problem is, fire, like it was, again, two things are true. It was great for humanity. It got us where we are today. It's also very polluting. So we need a fire 2.0. We need the same equivalent, lots of power. That is nuclear energy. That is not I'm not shilling for anyone. I don't make money out of nuclear in any way. But yeah, that is the logical conclusion. This is the Hadron Collider. So right now we're talking about shutting the Hadron Collider down because it uses so much energy. And again, lots of people are saying, why does it use so much? It shouldn't use so much. But on that basis, we should never send anything to space. We should dismantle the International Space Station. On that basis, we shouldn't progress. And I don't agree with that. And I think we never hear these arguments. It's almost people don't want to speak for progress because it's the anti-environmentalist thing. I don't believe that at all, actually. I think there's no problem with having the Hadron Collider if it's run on clean energy, which it is because it is sourced by France, by French energy, which is mostly nuclear. And they did that deliberately. But now France is having to supply that to other countries who shut down their own nuclear power plants, looking at you, Belgium, Germany, and Italy. And so now it's probably going to be shut down, which is fine temporarily, apparently. But if they do it long term, it will completely we won't be able to use it. And it's so sad because if you care about science, it's all about that wanting to know, that pushing the boundaries and progress. And we're shutting it down because why? It's because of the opposite reasons. I think that's really sad. And I like to point that out because it's quite a controversial view, and I don't think it should be. I think if we believe in science and we believe in progress, and we believe in trying to do the best for humanity and lifting people out of poverty, then we need lots of clean, abundant energy. It just needs to be clean. We shouldn't be ideological about it. Geographically, some things are suited to some nations more than others. That's fine. But also remember that we only progress because we say yes, not because we stand in the corner saying no. And I say that as someone who spent many years saying no to many things and decided that actually it was time instead to answer Andrew Neil's question, what are you going to do to replace gas? We're going to choose the power of the atom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you said you're not a shield for big uranium. I can ask, we have questions, but I ask you to repeat the question for the sake of the people who are streaming.
That was wonderful, thank you. I'll ask 2 questions if that's okay. Tim says yes. Okay. So first one is with regards to Germany. I noticed that nuclear power was only about 12%, dropped to about 10% before 2010, and then dropped to 5% since then. So why does it have such an outsized impact, especially since wind pretty much compensated for that? That's one question. The second question is with regards to what do we do in order to move forward quickly? Because obviously, nuclear power in 40 years is not what we need. We need it now. But there's political issues, there's technology issues, and so what do we do in order to move forward quickly?
So I need to summarize them first.
Yeah,
okay. Quickly. So first question, what's going on in the French data? Why is there a dip in nuclear energy? This is actually really interesting.
Was it German?
Sorry, in French energy. This is really interesting because I asked this question just a few weeks ago. I was on a panel in France with French Energy Minister, CEO of EDF, who I upset a little bit with my questions. And I said, why is this happening? Europe's in crisis and we've got this dip. And the CEO admitted that it was because orders had come from the French government that they were quietly going to phase out some of the nuclear. So they hadn't been hiring more workers. They'd closed one nuclear power plant, which was the Fessenheim power plant, which I protest the closure of that because it was for political reasons. There was a lot of pressure coming from the Greens. The government decided to shut it down. And I was worried that they're going to start doing what other places in Europe have done. And when Simon Levy, the CEO of EDF, admitted this, that clip went viral online. And then that same week, President Emmanuel Macron went on television and said, we are not phasing them out anymore. We're not going to do that. But those delays were because they weren't taking on more workers. These are ordinary health checks that they should do with nuclear. Like they should do them regularly. And they hadn't been doing them because there weren't enough workers. And they were thinking, well, we're going to shut them down anyway. That is what happened. So that is how much that drive to phase out nuclear was kind of tinging even a nation like France, where they've been so successful with it for so long. Second question
was about short term.
Yeah, what can we do in the short term? So renewables are quicker to build in the short term, but not not large scale because the grid still takes a long time to put in place. So, for example, France just unveiled a offshore wind farm, which will produce a lot more electricity, but it's taken 10 years to build. The data shows, I should have put this in there actually, the data shows that the average build time for a nuclear reactor is 7.5 years. So the issues are mostly political and not technological. In Japan and South Korea, they've built reactors in 3 years. That's what we should be aiming for. Now, I looked at this because I was kind of like, well, in Britain, it's taken like 12 years, and I agree that it's too long. It's too long. What is going on? What are you doing? Lack of workers. We send a lot of workers home because of Brexit. Lack of workers. You know, I think we should hand out the apprenticeships. It's not just nuclear engineers. It's welders. It's you know, people who mix the concrete. It's the builders. We have a massive shortage. So we want to get them built. We need the workers in place. They're good jobs. You know, they're unionized jobs. People do want those jobs. So we should incentivize them going into those careers. But yeah, so there's a model in South Korea which is great. There's good data on this if you want to look it up, and it's called the Standardization Model. So what they looked at was, why are they building them in 3 years and so many other places taking so long? What they found was, if you get the same set of engineers working on the same design, this is how it was explained to me by those engineers. It's like putting together Lego. Once you've done it once, you kind of know which piece goes where, and then you just build it again and again. Over time, the cost significantly comes down and the build time significantly comes down. Sounds obvious, but actually a lot of places don't realize this, because what they think, we tend to think with technology is you want innovation. But if the moment you change something, you've just made it take longer and cost more. You don't need to innovate with making an EPR reactor, which is the French model, or an AP1000, which is the American model. You just build the same thing again and again. So we're doing that in Britain. So Hinkley's taken a long time. That's going to come online in 2026. That will make a big difference to our energy issues. And we're also building Sizewell, but that will be much quicker. I would be surprised if it wasn't, because those engineers have the expertise now. They know what they're doing, and they will go in and they'll be able to do it much quicker. And then they should build a couple of reactors at Sizewell. And then there are plans to build 8 more. So actually, we're quite pro-nuclear in the UK, and it's not. I've noticed here it's quite a left-right issue, but in Britain, the Conservatives who are in power support nuclear, the Labour Party supports nuclear, and the Liberal Democrats support nuclear. So it's not, you know, the problem we have is that we need to actually get the things built. We need to do we need to look at other countries and learn what they've done. But actually, you know, in 10 years to decarbonize, even if it did take that long, I think that's still worth it. We're still going to need that energy in 10 years. There was a clip that went viral recently of a previous Lib Dem leader in the UK from 10 years ago. And in the clip, he says, we don't want to build this. It will take 10 years to come online. And it went viral recently, and everybody was saying, he said, it won't come online until 2022. And people were just saying, we're in an energy crisis now because you said it would take too long. So we'll still always need energy. And the thing I would say to people, we might need more. Like, if you think just 30 years ago, you didn't all have a phone, you didn't all have a laptop. We are very energy rich people. We will probably find more ways to use it, even if we are also being more efficient and using less. Both things are probably true. So we should plan for the future anyway, instead of thinking, well, you know, it takes too long. But in the interim, renewables, quite quick to build. But what that means is, don't phase out your coal so quickly. It's too ambitious. You can't phase it out until you have baseload to replace it, and that is nuclear, unless you want to stay dependent on fossil fuels.
How reliant on nuclear was Germany before they started closing everything down?
So they had 11 nuclear power stations. How reliant was Germany on nuclear power? Before they started phasing them out in 2011, I can't remember the exact number.
It was 12%, dropped to 10%, and then dropped to 5%.
Right, yeah, and their plan was to be 0% this year, but now they're pausing that. So actually, some of that was filled by renewables, but now they are reopening their mothballed coal-fired power stations because it's not enough now that the gas has been shut off. So they were quite heavily depending on gas, which, you know, they chose gas over nuclear. I understand that there's fear there, but it hasn't worked out.
And one of the problems was they couldn't replace the oil, the gas, and the coal.
It can't be done. And they poured, because people often say to me, well, no one's tried. They did try, and they poured billions into that They actually have the most expensive electricity in Europe. That was before the invasion. Guess where has the cheapest electricity to consumer in Europe? France. That's been true for decades. So it's also cheaper for the consumer not to do it that way.
Any other questions? Okay.
There's one online. If I pop it up on the
There's a question online.
it should be relatively fast.
There's lots on here.
It will. There we go.
So, do you want me to read it?
If you could,
Oh.
yes.
Legit question for question time. A big worry is oil and gas companies taking over the nuclear industry. They've demonstrated as being as incredibly unethical actors. Is there legitimate concern in being anti-nuclear if and only it's these companies?
And then it stops, doesn't it?
I ran out of
If but
power.
only if it's these companies continuing their death grip over energy.
Ah, yes, but fossil fuel industry is building lots of renewables as well. They advertise it quite heavily. So who else is going to invest in this stuff? I mean, look, I don't think inherently fossil fuel industry is Mr. Burns. I don't think that's true. It's just people making a living. Maybe there are some people in there who, like I said earlier, they did some bad things. I don't believe that's everybody. I think a lot of people would be quite happy to transition to cleaner jobs and do a good job. I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt there. But actually, it's an interesting question because I was in the French press a lot recently when I went out and did this talk, and quite a lot of people in Britain, not in France, said, "Oh, she's just a lobbyist for nuclear." And I said, "But in France, EDF is owned by the government. It has an 80% stake in it. At that time, it's now increased. So why would the government employ someone to like lobby itself? Like they own EDF. So there are different ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be owned by these big companies that people feel are unethical. And yeah, they have been unethical in many ways. It can be done, you know, in France, the government has a lot of say in what EDF is doing, how much it's charging its customers at every level, basically, which is why when they said you need to start phasing out workers, EDF just started doing it. You know, they don't have that power that we've given fossil fuels for a long time. So it can be done in a better way than with oil, gas and coal.
I just wanted to know your view of modular and miniature nuclear plants, which ultimately they want to have factory manufactured, and also nuclear fusion.
What's my view of modular reactors and nuclear fusion? So modular reactors are really good technology. It's already used in boats. The idea, if anyone doesn't know, we often call them SMRs or MMRs. They're small modular reactors. Instead of having a big power plant, you have a small one, and you can, you know, plant it in. You can put it in a shut down coal-fired power station. So there was a report, a Department of Energy report that just came out in America where they actually assessed all of their coal-fired power stations, the closed ones and the functioning ones. And they found that 80% of them are absolutely perfect to just stick a reactor there, which is really good when you think about cost and build time, because most of that infrastructure is there. So the idea is sound, but what I would say is no one's actually done it in practice yet. That's not a reason to say we shouldn't. And I know, you know, in Britain, we're quite excited about it and we're funding it. We've passed a site for it to be tested. When the data's in, I'm happy to say that works. It's brilliant. In theory, it sounds brilliant, but I wouldn't right now say we should put them everywhere. However, I understand that people are moving that way, and that they seem a bit more receptive to kind of the small reactors and just a little bit more, you know, easy to accept mentally. Fusion, you know, fusion, I get asked about fusion a lot. It seems like one of these things that is just so far away, and I understand that it has been far away for a long time, but recently, just in the last couple of years, there have been breakthroughs in fusion that we've not seen before. I wouldn't be surprised if it was around the corner. We shouldn't wait for it, but it's pretty exciting what's happening in fusion. And wouldn't it be amazing if we just had that technology and it just powered all of our needs? We would have abundant technology, like abundant clean energy. I only hope that people wouldn't then protest it and prevent it being built.
Yeah, protest the sun.
Oh, thanks, Zion. That's great. You described nuclear power at its safest, I think. And you showed us the Nord Stream 2 leak. Well, reportedly, that was due to sabotage by the Russians, one theory goes. Now, if the Russians equally wanted to sabotage a nuclear reactor in the West or a nuclear storage
what's the worst possible scenario for a terrorist attack on a nuclear power plant? I get asked this a lot because it's basically happening right now at the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine. When the invasion started, they immediately went for that power plant, and people were worried, are they going to up? And I was saying to people, it actually can't be. It would just shut down. They're not like RMBK reactors. What happened again with one of these reactors? They just don't blow up in that way. But equally, if you attacked it with weapons, that wouldn't be great. That would be an awful disaster scenario. But then you could attack anything with weapons. Russia has atomic weapons, and that would be an awful scenario. Anyway, it wouldn't be worse just because there are reactors there. They can be shut down very quickly. So what happened when the invasion happened was that the workers actually shut them down, started shutting down the reactors. But for unknown reasons, they were told to start them back up. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they wanted the energy for themselves. I don't know. I think the biggest danger is just that people invade and shut them down, to be honest, because then lots of people die. They have no electricity. We don't think about that, but that's true. It happens every year in Britain in winter, and it doesn't get that cold. It's going to be worse this year, and it's going to be much worse in Germany where it gets very cold. So I think it's one of those things where it's something that the story is so compelling that it makes you feel afraid. And I'm afraid of the idea of a terrorist attack. But again, on a nuclear power station, I wouldn't even say it hasn't happened. It has happened. And the worst case scenario is that they didn't treat the workers well. Like wouldn't let them go home. And the International Atomic Energy Agency had to send people over there and convince them and negotiate and get them to let the workers go home to their families and treat them better. I actually think that was the worst outcome. Nothing has happened at that power plant. Otherwise, if that changes, I'm happy to say, okay, I was wrong. But actually, even Chernobyl, yes, Chernobyl is terrible. And they knew when they chose an RBK reactor, they knew that it had a design flaw, and they did it anyway. So that's not great anyway. But also you can't have any energy without some cost. Like, I'm sorry to say it, there is some cost. Every type of energy requires mining. Solar panels require mining for quite rare minerals sometimes, cadmium, which can be lethal. Everything has a human cost. So what I think is you choose the thing that is most energy dense, that has the least cost to human life, and also a good small land footprint, which I didn't even mention, but that nuclear ticks the boxes for all of those things. So you have to look at even the meltdowns and things and the outcomes of that in context, which I know it's hard to do, but like I say, nothing is killing people like fossil fuels and from just air pollution. And then let's think about climate change and what's going to happen going forward, or what's already happening. It just doesn't compare. You could have an attack on every nuclear power station in the world and it still wouldn't compare, because you wouldn't have that number of people dying, basically.
Many years ago, I visited the Lucas Heights reactors down here, which are primarily medical radioisotopes and things like that. I actually got to walk inside one of the reactors. I wasn't on, but there was a sign up on the wall there, and this is in reference to Teddy Kennedy, who was very anti-nuclear, and they said more people died at Chappaquiddick than at 3 Mile Island.
Ooh.
And so that was a little peek there. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thanks, Zion. I've got a question about the dependency on China for solar panels. So in the same way that Europe and Germany in particular has got into the situation that it's currently in because of a dependency on gas and fuel from Russia, that the rest of the world, who are, my understanding is, largely dependent on China for the manufacture of solar panels, putting ourselves in a position similar in some ways. So that's one question. And second question is, I've only recently learned of how a large percentage of what is considered renewable energy in Europe is comprised of biofuels, which is really the least energy dense fuel that there is. Going back to your fire, the earliest use of technology that we have, surely there needs to be a reclassification of the way that we consider biofuels, as a in terms of it's renewable sometimes, but apparently a lot of old growth forests are also being exploited in Europe and America. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Okay, great questions. Thank you. So first question, are we making ourselves dependent on China when we source solar panels from there? Yes. And this is very hard to talk about because people have this perception of solar panels as like, they're so clean and they're so green. And actually they require a lot of materials and they require a lot of cheap labor. And one of the reasons they're so cheap is because they're made by very cheap labor in China. I've actually looked into this where I've spoken to people in Britain, can't we build them here? It just wouldn't be cost effective because you'd be paying the workers well and you'd be treating them well. It's pretty nasty stuff to get into. And Germany even tried to produce them and found that it was not cost effective. So we continue to import them from China and we don't even know where they're sourced from. And a lot of them are coming from Uyghur camps, which concerns me greatly. But it is quite a hard thing to talk about because you get instantly told, why are you anti-renewables? Why don't you want solar? We do need to think about this, especially given the fact that they last about 25 years. So people always say they're cheap. They are cheap and they do work straight away, but not in a long-term way. So you think, nuclear power stations, they last about 60 years. That ends up paying itself off, which is why it's cheaper for the consumer in the long run. But you're constantly dependent on China for solar panels. They own the supply for solar panels. And something like 45% of polysilicon has been found, being mined by people in Uyghur camps. I was on a panel discussion yesterday, and the title of the discussion was, "What does a just transition look like?" There are two of the speakers, and they said all the things you would expect. It looks like lots of solar panels. It looks like, there was good points in there. We protect sacred lands, all of this stuff I support. But I've just said, what? There's no just transition. There's just no way to do it. Like there is no way to decarbonize without some harm somewhere to some people. What we've got to do is just minimize it as much as possible. And that still brings me back to nuclear, because you can source the uranium from Canada or Australia. You are the third largest exporter of uranium. Also, it's so energy dense, you don't need a ton of it like you would with coal. A small amount goes a long way. Once you've built it, you fully own it and it lasts a really long time. The jobs are unionized and it has a tiny land footprint. So you don't need a lot of land for it, which I'm not that personally against, but I know that in Britain we don't have a lot of space. So there's a lot of arguments against so in the last year, we had 25 solar farm applications denied because people protested them, including green politicians, kind of waving the flag for, we stopped this being built on our land. And now we're in an energy crisis. So you just think, they've got to go somewhere. So I like to argue for nuclear on the basis that it just takes up so little space. And it's often in seaside towns in Britain, which are quite deprived areas of workers. People are happy to have the jobs there. Second question.
Biofuels.
Second question, why are biofuels considered part of the renewable energy mix? There's a lot of discussion about this at the moment. We're trying to get it changed. I know Greta Thunberg wrote an article about it, which has drawn attention to it. I knew already, because it skews the figures for how much renewables has this country got? Well, some of it is biomass. Some of it is they're literally cutting down trees and burning them, which is also polluting. So what I would say is the term renewables is not a scientific term. Activists came up with this term and they chose what went in there, and then everybody just went along with it. And it's so hard. I do these really quite in your face statements, messaging to get people to think. It's really hard to do it about renewables. I don't know how we're going to change that, but people just have a perception that they're very green. It's all wind and sun and it's natural. Someone said to me, it's freezing. It's not free. None of it's free. The sun's technically free. Is the sun free? I don't know. I don't want to get into it. But that's the perception. It's very clever, almost clever marketing. I don't think anyone did it deliberately, but that's happened. And what's lumped in with renewables is just kind of bizarre, and it needs complete overhaul. Because actually, what does renewable mean? Plenty of people have made the case that nuclear energy is renewable, because the process that makes it work. What does it mean? What does it mean? What's not renewable? What runs out? I don't know. We just need to have the discussions and try and change things, I think.
You're talking about logical discussion using rationality. Sorry about that. Okay, it's ironic when you talk about photovoltaic cells, because they were actually first developed, or a lot of the work was developed about 20 kilometres from here, down at New South Wales University. and no one was interested in taking it up. So the fellow who was doing it there went to America, but they showed a lot of interest. So it's part of our problem from a long time ago. Would you please join with me in thanking Zion very much for the presentation? Thank you very much. I remind you, magazines, please go and take some. There's some here, there's some at the back there. Help yourself, they're free. As I said, the Skeptic, the Australian Skeptic magazine, regarded the best skeptical magazine in Australia, and the Skeptical Inquirer, which is not bad as well. So help yourself to those, they're free, and we'll keep your eye on Meetup for our next event. Again, hopefully rain, we hope. And also rain notwithstanding.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for coming.